Okay. Should I also look in Crowdcast and wait till my face pops up and then start talking? But isn't there a delay? Yeah. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming to the Loft Mentor Series reading this evening. Thank you so much. There's obviously a lot going on right now, physically, emotionally, and mentally for so many of us, particularly here in the Twin Cities. We want to acknowledge the senseless, horrific murder of a Black man, George Floyd, by Minneapolis police. We hope for justice for George Floyd, his family, and the Black community. You're in our hearts. This is a senseless tragedy, and the city is, I have no words. But thank you so much for being with us here tonight. If you're here, you know that we're celebrating the Mentor Series, a series that the Loft has operated for over 40 years, thanks to the continued support of the Jerome Foundation and the generosity of Loft members. The Loft Mentor Series pairs established writers with emerging writers from the Minnesota community. And today we have this terrific reading lined up with 4 mentees and 2 of the mentors. If you're already a Loft member, thank you. You make readings like this and all of our programming possible. If you're not yet a member or you're a lapsed member, it's never too late to join or rejoin. Any amount makes you a member. You could take a look at the Mentor Series and all of our many programs at www.loft.org. So the way tonight's going to work is that there will be short readings by the 4 mentees, followed by slightly longer readings by the 2 mentors. And we're just going to jump right into it. Let's just roll with it. You don't need to hear me talking all night. So first up, we have Jenn Del Rey, who is a half Japanese and was born and raised in Kyoto, Japan. He received an MFA from Hamline University, and his work has appeared in the Best Small Fictions 2017, the Monarch Review, and others. He is the winner of the 2018 Force Majeure Flash Contest, the 2018 Up North Poetry Prize, and the 2018 Great Midwest Poetry Contest. It's always hard to go first, even on an online experience. So everybody, please welcome Jenn Del Rey.
Thank you, Val. Thanks for the introduction and for your thoughts. I had actually been meaning to read something new today, but I found that there's just I found myself drifting away from the stories that I've written over these past few months. So even though I have written a lot over this past year, I've decided to read something that I wrote a long time ago. And so the first thing I'm actually going to read is a poem. I hope that's okay, even though I'm supposed to be a fiction writer. Just before I start, can everybody hear me all right? I'm talking loud enough. Okay, great. This is, like I wrote in the bio, I'm half Japanese, and my grandparents in Japan lived through the war. And so this is kind of, this poem is imagining a kind of fantastical evacuation for my grandmother. It's called Let's Say. Let's say my grandmother dreams of evacuation. Let's say this is winter before the first bomb falls, before the first fire tightropes across the first shaggy roof. Let's say the car is black, the captain is short with his hands pinned to the small of his belt, the tire tracks like 2 whips in the snow. Let's say they each cannot bring more than will fit in 1 bag. Let's say that their luggage cannot be too heavy. The captain says their destination is the moon, which is resting in the hollow of that mountain with its pink toes in the grass for them. Let's say they are meant to kill the livestock, but in the shadow of the barn, when the captain's back is turned, they unhook the latches and set them free. Let's say the hens are clucking in the garden, with their wingtips nestled in the pages of cabbage. Let's say the cow sweeps a drowsy sparrow off the beam of the door and comes blinking into moonlight with the bird on its head. Let's say the cats are yawning on the idling engine. Let's say the captain, with his pinned hands, will not look around to see them. Let's say they set off with the car at the head of the line, and the shuffling feet and muffled conversation sound exactly the same. Let's say the moon is rumored to be covered in clovers, blanketing dirt that's never been tilled. Let's say my grandmother dreams she is walking this line that stretches up a mountain to the silver of the landscape which is winking above them. Let's say the beauty of the night stays silent forever. Let's say the captain never pulls his pistol from his holster. Let's say no parent ever scans the dimpled hills for cover. Let's say no one, not any one, of the lovers and neighbors who one way or another, in fear or fire or hunger, in spring or in summer, will die, will die. All right, that I am technically supposed to be a fiction writer, so I've gone with the story for the second thing. It's about it's inspired by, I guess, a typhoon that hit my hometown of Kyoto a few years ago. And Kyoto is this place that never used to get hit by typhoons. And so when this storm approached, this strange thing happened where instead of doing the thing that you're supposed to do when a storm is coming, which is to board up your house, people started crisscrossing tape across the windows. And that's a thing that people used to do during the war to guard against bombs falling. And so this is a story kind of about historical memory and how sometimes it gets unburied in these strange times. So it's called Preparations 2015. 70 years after the war is over, and here is my mother taping white crosses to the windows against the bombardment of a storm that threatens to settle in the hollow of her yard. Plywood is better, is what I could have told her if I had been there to say it. My mother, with her straw hat, her elbow-length gloves, stained in the crooks of her fingers by the loam of the garden, and my father, with his bad back at the base of the ladder, braced against a wind that hasn't yet come. Maybe there's no stopping the memories that push through the dirt like amber cicadas waking as one from a long and troubled sleep. Maybe there's nothing I could have said to my mother on that ladder, who turns from the window and sees her whole life spread out before her. The neighbors with their children throwing crazy streamers of masking tape to each other across the gravel of their driveway. The old man down the block who is stringing the curtains closed over the sink of his kitchen, who is filling metal buckets that must be 1,000 years old with a hose that he snakes through the gap in his cobweb door. And here is my grandmother, unbidden, who closes her invisible hands over my mother's eyes, who lets her warm breath heave into her ears with the knowledge of the sirens that rang and rang, even when the bombs were falling, even when the fires were twining up the street and wavering the patterns on the crisscross glass that was meant to hold the world at bay. And it's my father, in the end, with his anxious eyes, who peers up at my mother against the ceiling of clouds and reaches his hand to the skin of one ankle where her pants have ridden past the hem of her blood pressure socks. That's enough, is what he says in the only voice that cuts through the haze of her thoughts. And she climbs down the ladder with her blind toes seeking the rungs until my father pats the dust off the backs of her shoulders, and they stand for a spell with their arms at their hips, watching the storm roll in and the tumbling wind that hauls grit from the soil and sets it rising and rising until it turns to light. That's all from me.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ken, for being with us and sharing your work. And, you know, writing is writing. We're not going to judge you for saying that you're a fiction writer and sharing poetry. We love it all. Thank you so much. Next up, let's just keep it rolling right into this program. Next up, we have Claudette Webster. Claudette is a poet and nonfiction writer living in Minneapolis. She has received fellowships from Canem and North Country Institute and Retreat for Writers of Color. Her work has appeared in Essence, Pitkin Review, and Black Renaissance Noire. She earned an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College. She is currently working on a memoir about her family's journey from Jamaica to America. Please, everybody, welcome Claudette Webster.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So I'm only reading poetry. And so the first one is called Forgiveness. Please forgive me, the manhole in the street, the man in a hole in the street. Please forgive me, the woman on the bus who says, my day is hard every day. Please forgive me. Do you have $1, 50 cents, change? Anything will do. Please forgive me for not answering your call. I didn't mean to lie. I didn't know what to say. Please forgive me for rambling on the page. The second one is called Breaking Bread. A mother and daughter sit near a window at a restaurant a few blocks from the Lexington Avenue subway line they have both traveled on to come together from different directions. They have not seen each other for many months, not since the girl's brother assaulted her outside the mother's home. After kicking and punching her, he said, next time, I'll kill you, and walked away. The girl called the police, who upon arrival called an ambulance. They asked her where her brother went. She said she didn't know. They were not close. At the hospital, an emergency room doctor asks if she is a victim of domestic abuse after examining the ball that formed near her eye. He told her not to return home. She traveled then by bus from the Bronx to Queens to the home of her namesake, who had taken time off from work to meet with her. The namesake offers shelter and a place to be until she figures out her next steps. The mother called that night and asked to speak with her daughter. The girl, in pain from her wounds, hears the mother say, he didn't mean to do it. He only acted that way because he didn't take his medication. The girl sees the black and blue marks on her face and body, can feel the blows as her brother struck her. She knows this is not the first time he has acted this way. When it happened before, she took him to court to get an order of protection. The mother brought a lawyer to protect her son. The girl felt betrayed. This time, she will take his threat seriously. This time, she will leave her mother's home for good. At a checkered table, a mother and daughter sit as the sun begins to set. Their talk is halting, seeking connection through pain and blood of their shared stories. Unexpected formations. Outside, the birds sing from the trees. A voice calls, "Hey!" There is more, but that is all that I understand. The language he speaks is unknown to me. On the streets, cars move, slow then fast. Planes drone in the distance, moving the air with their heaviness. On my walk this morning, a flock of geese flew overhead. There must have been 40 of them. I didn't count. I saw the length of their formation and stopped to admire their symmetry. Their calls to each other alerted me to their presence. Later, I saw a family of geese on the grass with their young. They pecked at the ground. Nearby, a young woman played the guitar and sang. A man laid close to her, smoking. Near the shore, a parade of mallards and their chicks. At a turn in the path, a group of children in red and black uniforms exit the park, as another group runs down the slope with flags, orange and red. They do not wear uniforms. They stream across the path, ecstatic to be outdoors. An adult in the rear calls, "Stop, stop," and the lead person freezes and the formation comes to a halt as I navigate around them, thankful for the haven of the park. This next one is called Retard. At school, they say we are outsiders. We're not wanted, not welcome. Go back where you came from. On the playground, I joined in Chase, Thomas, Charmaine, Mary Alice, and Charlotte. They speak of retard, a girl like me, short, brown, with a high forehead, smart and quiet. They speak with derision. Their tones grate my ear. I don't know who this person is, but I feel myself grow small, feel the walls go up to protect me from their barbs. 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do you appreciate? Mother in a gray ruffled dress, pressed hair and bag, comes to school, listens to teachers talk of my efforts, my steadfastness. What you looking at? 4 eyes. What you looking at? Big head. What you looking at? Retard. I write poems instead of math problems. Get detention. My teacher, Mr. Alvey, hits me with a ruler several times. The memory stings for days, years. Don't stand out, assimilate, fit in. Always I feel like a misfit, always out of sync. Retard. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Claudette, for sharing with us today. We're all giving you virtual high five claps without microphones on. I see everyone on Crowdcast doing the same thing. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Patti Kamiya, a nonfiction writer and a historian, escaped from the Los Angeles suburbs. She now forages wild plants and treats historical amnesia in St. Paul. She received a Minnesota State Arts Board Cultural Community Partnership grant to start her current manuscript, The Kimono Shop off Nicollet. Her story, Community and Kickboxing in St. Paul, appears in St. Paul Almanac, Resistance and Resilience, Volume 12. Please welcome Patti Kamiya.
Thank you for joining us this evening. So tonight I am reading from The Kimono Shop off Nicollet. It's about a Japanese family who moved to Minneapolis in 1919. I based this work from materials at the University of Minnesota Immigration History Research Archives. Immigration Act, May 1924. When her family moved to Minneapolis, Nobu became Chojo, eldest daughter, tasked with setting things right. When Mama was busy, Nobu watched Mio and later baby Kazu. When the children had birthday parties, big affairs with 30 children and 10 grown-ups in their house, Mama smiled for guests and spoke little. Over time, Nobu noticed when Mama pressed her lips together and learned to instruct the hired helpers before a huge thing or two crushed the room. Mama conversed easily only with her old friend, Mrs. Luders. When Mrs. Luders went home to Wisconsin, Papa wrote Mama's letters to her. And once she entered junior high, Nobu took over. The family started out speaking Japanese at home, but later Mio and Kazu answered only in English. Nobu eventually served as interpreter between Mama and the younger sisters, between Mama and the outside world. In 1924, the Chinese Exclusion Act matured to its full strength. It now applied to the Japanese too. With that, the Japanese Empire learned that even after they labored to lift the unequal trade treaties, they were still not equal to the United States. And thus, Asian immigration became the enemy. Mama locked away the US birth certificates for Nobu, big brother Kiyoshi, and now little Kazu in her writing desk. Those small pieces of paper gave the children a home. When Calvin Coolidge signed the Japanese Exclusion Bill, almost unanimously passed by Congress, Papa threw down his newspaper in frustration. The new laws would not derail his dreams. He canceled the children's Japanese citizenship, except for Mio, who was born in Japan, so that no paper would interrogate his family's loyalties. He notified the Japanese consulate in Chicago, then inquired with the local municipal office in Sakai. So many papers traveling by rail car, then by freight over the sea. Paper that a single match could level to ash. Early 20th century American life was a competition that started early and never ended. Louis Agassiz elementary school children not only vied for top spelling scores, but also kept track of who got the nicest dictionary for Christmas. A student in grade 5C observed, it costs 35 cents to get your name in gold on the cover, but well worth the expense. The thrift club collected each child's bank book so they could determine which homeroom made the most bank deposits for the prize. Even so, Nobu and her siblings needed more papers than their peers. Report cards with a gold star, the Lord's Prayer pressed on cardstock. The year the Immigration Act passed, Nobu, Kiyoshi, and Mio performed in school plays, church programs, and PTA meetings. These events served an important function. Each time their names appeared in civic life, this documented that they too were American. The family also immersed themselves in burgeoning American consumerism and mass media. They bought one house, then moved to a bigger one car, then a better one. They stayed healthy under the crackle of a violet Raye lamp, listened to the radio, went downtown for Sunday movies. In each place they lived, the piano assumed a place of honor in the parlor. And wherever there was a piano, Nobu thrived. With each chord she played, her bones remembered Auntie Mine back in Sakai. Those cool autumn afternoons, little Nobu sat on the floor while Auntie Mine practiced church hymns for prayer meetings, weaving Nobu a musical cradle that held her tight. One year at the Minnesota State Fair, Nobu played the piano for WCCO Live Radio. Papa waited for the family at his booth in the Varied Industries building, where pale yellow letters announced Japan Art and Novelty on a field of Copenhagen blue. As Papa's assistants tended to business, Nobu walked with her family through late summer dust clouds, past clumps of fairground visitors, evaluating prize horses and farm machinery. They arrived at the radio stage early enough to make small talk, but even after Papa's careful introduction, the announcer struggled with Nobu's name on air. Nobu was almost 11 and unfazed. Although fairground chatter dampened the air, Nobu sat at the piano as if she were playing in a neoclassical concert hall. She would reach her audience sitting by the radio that afternoon. She lifted her hands and launched her music. Perhaps it was a pair of Bach inventions. Can you hear me? Sorry, okay. So Nobu launched her music. Perhaps it was a pair of Bach inventions, intricate vines of notes, climbing a twisted trellis, sprouting leaves here, squash blossoms there. The fairground hum harmonized with Nobu's orderly rows of sound. The announcer's daughter stood off stage, tugging her hair. She was 2 years older and had played one of the inventions only that spring. After the performance, Papa treated Nobu and the other children to sweet corn ice cream. Kazu insisted on seeing the baby animals before they left. Then Papa went back to check on the second Japan art and novelty booth at the Women's Building. He was tickled pink to have Nobu at the fair with him that day. After supper, Papa drove to see Yasui-san, who ran the Japanese goods store in St. Paul. Nobu was used to seeing her father go out at night, and the state fair was always a busy time. Still, she wished he lingered longer with them that hot afternoon, wiping ice cream off their noses, asking each of his 4 children to take him to their favorite baby animal. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Patti. Thank you so much for reading. And I know that, doing an online reading is a trip because you can't hear the applause and the audience reactions. And you all can't see the crowdcast the way I can, so I'll let you all know very briefly. Those of you who have read, people are reacting. I see some clap emojis. I see a lot of heart emojis. I see a lot of, there's one smiley face with heart eyes. You know how it rolls. There's something I think that's flowers or something. Anyway, the people are with you. You can't see them, you can't hear them, but the people are with you and they're appreciating you. So thank you so much. The last mentee we have reading tonight will be Michael Garberich. Michael Garberich is a fiction writer. He works in privacy and information security in Minneapolis. Don't make him mad at you, right? And he writes short fiction in the evenings and on weekends. Raised in Minnesota, he was born in Seoul, South Korea. Everybody, please welcome Michael Garberich.
Thank you, Bao, for that introduction, and hello, everybody. So I am going to be reading an excerpt from the middle section of a short story that is titled Good Old Raymond. And it is my take on a quote-unquote typical Minnesota short story, which just means that it's set at a lake and it has a dock and a paddle boat and there's some wildlife. So in this story, the narrator has spent her weekend with her parents and her grandparents. Her parents have now returned to their home, and she's going to spend the week with her grandparents, but when she wakes up, they're not there. So she goes looking for them, and that's where I'm going to pick up. So from Good Old Raymond. The route to the lake was easy to follow. A path was cut into the span of trees separating my grandparents from their neighbors who were only around for the occasional weekend. Beyond this house was a dirt road that I followed briefly before leaving it for a second path that led right to a wooden staircase, then to the lake, but no grandparents. I sat at the edge of the dock and watched the sun warm the water. In the ropey weeds below, tiny fish came and went, nibbling at their breakfast. The gentlest of waves approached one by one to see what was happening on land, then started back on their leisurely journey across to the other side. My grandparents' paddle boat was tied to the dock near the shore. It was a narrow boat for 2, with a cover to keep out the rain. I removed the cover, folded it, and set it in my grandpa's boat, then took a life jacket out from under a cushioned compartment near the motor and slipped it on. I got in and slowly made a course along the shore, keeping an eye on land for my grandparents. But with no sign of life on land, I steered away from shore and headed out toward the center, following the wabi beam of sun that stretched over the lake. I made it a ways out, but eventually grew tired. With a second person, we could make a good tour of the lake, but alone, it was a hassle. I caught my breath, then turned the boat back. I was at a distance where everything near the shore was flattened into a solid, dark line, but I could tell at once that someone was there, a tiny figure standing at the end of the dock. I kept a steady pace and closed in on the shore. Once I was within shouting distance, I saw it was a Korean boy. I guessed he was about my age. He waved, and his hand looked enormous. When I was right up to the dock, I saw the rest of him was normal size, but he had bigger hands than my dad's, and they were smooth like the back of a garden shovel. Without saying anything, I threw him the rope so he could tow me the rest of the way and tie the boat to the dock. He seemed to know what to do right away. I waited to step out of the boat until he had secured it. But he was clumsy with the rope. He couldn't seem to get it to do what he wanted. The end would flop over one of his large hands, and when he went to fashion it into something resembling a knot, he'd lose command of it, and the whole effort would come undone. After a few rounds of this, he gave up and wound the rope around the post in a layered mess and found a space to stuff the end in. It bulged like a fungus, but it held. Then he got down on all fours and extended a hand to help me out. "Oh, thank you. I can do it," I said. He stayed there with his one hand out like he was an exhibit. "No," I said, trying not to look at his big hand. He backed away. Standing next to him, I could see we were about the same height and age, but those big hands hanging at the ends of his skinny arms made him seem both younger and smaller. I greeted him in Korean, but he didn't respond. He turned away and looked out over the lake. A couple of ducks made their landing in the water and immediately dipped their heads below the surface. Then all at once he came alive, as though he'd been waiting for a signal that he found in those ducks. "Good morning, miss," he said in English. His voice made me forget about his hands. I couldn't help but come down to see what all that splashing was. I half expected to see a scene out here, but then I arrive and all I see is a girl ready to pedal herself across the ocean. "My name is Raymond." He held out his hand, but I didn't know which part of it to grab onto. "I'm So-yoon," I said. I didn't care to see what that hand was like, so I waved. He asked me to repeat it, and I did. He nodded and repeated it to himself under his breath. "Raymond," I said. "That's kind of an old-fashioned name." He smiled. "Well, maybe I'm an old-fashioned boy," he said. And then he started whistling a tune. I went to undo the tangle he made of the rope. "Sorry about that," Raymond said. "They come with their advantages, but they can't do everything." I knew he was talking about his hands, but I couldn't look. I focused on retying the rope to the dock with a tight, neat knot. "So that's how it's done," he said when I finished. He went to the end of the dock and got down on his stomach. He dropped his hands in the water and let them soak there. He sighed, like it was a great pleasure to reach into the lake. I started to think that I should head back to the house. "Why are you out here all alone?" he asked, still looking down at the water. "Oh, I'm staying with my grandparents for a week, but they went for a walk. I should get back and see if they're there now." He didn't say anything. "It was nice meeting you, Raymond." "Had enough of the lake, have you?" he said. "It's just my grandparents," I said. They don't know that I came down here." I looked at him lying there with his hands in the water. The ducks were long gone. It was only him and the fish now. And seeing them all alone like that, I couldn't help myself. I said, "It's the house with the tire swing." There's a fire pit in front. I was almost up the steps when I heard him say, "It was nice meeting you too, So-Yun." Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for that wonderful reading. I want to give a special shout out to your cat, Michael, who made a guest appearance and is like totally having a ball behind your left shoulder there. Thank you so much for that reading. Thank you all the mentees who read tonight. That would be, again, Claudette, Patti, and Michael. For those of you who don't know, the Mentor Series, people have to apply to get into this program. And because Minnesota is full of so many talented writers, it is very difficult to get into this program. So congratulations, mentees, for making it into the program. Thank you for reading tonight, and we hope it's been a great experience for you, and we hope that it continues to be. Before we move on to our two mentor readings, I want to remind you that Milkweed, our partners at Milkweed Books, they're selling Melissa and Gretchen's books. There should be a light blue green button type thing at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that to purchase their books. Definitely buy their books from an independent bookseller that does great work, Milkweed Books. First up, we have Gretchen Marquette. Gretchen earned her MFA in poetry from Hamline University, where she served as the assistant poetry editor for Waterstone Review. Her work has appeared in Harper's, Tin House, Poetry, the Paris Review, and other places. Oh, just those small publications, Gretchen? Do you have any like bigger publications where you were published? I'm kidding, of course. I'm being sarcastic. Never mind. Her first book, Mayday, was released by Grey Wolf Press in 2016 and was nominated for a Minnesota Book Award. She lives in Powderhorn, a neighborhood in South Minneapolis, and teaches at various colleges and universities in the Twin Cities. Please welcome Gretchen Marquette.
Thank you so much, Bao. I was joking that you were making me blush, but then I actually did blush, and everybody saw, so thank you for that. Thank you to everybody for being here tonight to listen to some literature, and thank you to all the people who are reading with me. It's really an honor. It's just been such an amazing experience working with the fellows so far this year, and I'm eager to hear more from them. So I think what I'll do is just read 3 poems from my book. I haven't read from it in quite a while, so I'm going to read 3 poems from my book, and then we'll get to hear from Melissa. So. The first poem that I'm going to read is called Andromeda. From 150 quintillion miles away, they took Andromeda's photograph, tinted it like a daguerreotype, put her in a purple dress. We've got Hubble, got the electron microscope. You can choose between them but still see the same thing. Almost 500 septillion atoms in a teaspoon of water. A star exploded, bore iron, then came blood. The hole in my jaw has clotted with something from a star. Lost tooth, too weak to last my lifetime. It will exist, broken and bad, long after my femurs turn carbon. This transmutation, it's how my beloved will become an olive tree, an eggshell. There are places in the universe where time matters less. Remember this when you want to gut yourself, in love with a married or dead man. If you can figure out how to try again, you could be the one fixing your hair for him, be the one he will probably stop loving. You still have a chance to meet the other one some afternoon at the piano, a duet. The dark magnolia of your belly. When you sense it and tremble, you can be a wave of salt water, you can collapse for a little while. Time matters less in other places in the universe. Fetus and mummy, think about all that new skin. And think about your body and its toughness, how briefly it's allowed to be. You have got to see it through. Glut yourself with the sound of bells if you have to, use whatever you need. It's such a fleeting state, really, like the 60-second theatrical tour of Andromeda, flushed in red and gold. A body, heavenly or not. Her name means to think of a man. Andromeda, reserved for one she didn't love, chained to a rock, doomed to be devoured. She still had passion, 7 sons, a little girl, heavenly entombment, but believe me, you may never get what you want. So when your ribs prove too small a cage for such a feeling, bones bowing outward and higher up you're almost blind, you can stand still, you can be a conductor, you can think of a cluster of stars, you can think of one of your atoms as a galaxy with its own type of horse and music, maybe something akin to the viola. There are mothers there, certainly, and something like the vulture. Think of a woman, wrists manacled, think of any nautilus shell of any name you've given. It may as well have been Andromeda. We may be laying this place to waste, and you may never get what you want. It can't matter much. Somewhere, a star is ceasing to be a star. We call it death. For a long time, I was sort of fascinated by Hansel and Gretel, the fairy tale, and I wrote a few poems thinking about speaking with Gretel, and this is one that is kind of an epistolary, like letter form sort of poem, and it's called Dear Gretel. Dear Gretel, did you spend the night curled close to his cage, near enough that you smelled the straw of his bedding? Did you lie there and listen to him exhale? Did he talk in his sleep, a sound loud, nonsensical, its echo disappearing into dark like a rock tossed down a well? How did you keep him safe? Was it merely proximity? Say the danger is too large to fit in an oven. What would you do? Dear Gretel, was it your idea to give the witch something to pinch? The chicken bone, I mean. Did it haunt you how akin it was to his little finger? Dear Gretel, they say you stole her glasses, ground their lenses to dust, to flour. Is that a hint? What's to steal when hazard has excellent sight? Dear Gretel, did you ever consider the moment his face could disappear behind flames? Did you wonder if it would be a clear day, a Wednesday, laundry day, that without him you would no longer be a sister, just a girl with an ashy apron? Gretel, when the stones in the pit were cold, the witch out collecting herbs or busy snoozing, did you fill these lulls with distraction? Did it help to give him things, chocolate, gummy bears, magazines to read? If he asked for sheets with a higher thread count or for grass to plant because he was lonely with all of that dry straw, did that finally break your heart? Gretel, how did it feel later to walk in the woods with him? A witch's smoldering bones, just color in the sky. Was it relief you breathed, or did you keep your fear? Introduce it to thin ice, unstable rock, opaque water. Did you always wince afterward, watching him dive? Did you let it go on too long? The last poem that I'm going to read is actually the last poem in my book, and it has an epigraph. I wrote the poem sort of in response to the epigraph because I didn't necessarily agree with it. The epigraph says, the poem is called What We Will Love with the Time We Have Left, and the epigraph says, all life will die, all mind will cease, and it will all be as if it never happened. That, to be honest, is the goal to which evolution is traveling. That is the benevolent end of the furious living and furious dying. All life is no more than a match struck in the dark and blown out again. The final result is to deprive it completely of meaning. What we will love with the time we have left. First, the purple flowers growing along the sidewalk, so saturated with color they make us blind to look at them. Then the sound of a screen door slamming, the smell of pine pollen and beeswax, the silvery eyes of the concrete deer guarding a bird bath, the uncomfortable feel of wet jeans stiff with sand, the taste of well water from an aluminum cup, the sound of water being poured into a glass, hot tea with one ice cube in it. the silk of frog skin and the stinging nettle, smell of wet rock, scent of aftershave on steam, squeak of finger against the mirror, the day-old cookies in their white paper bag brought home to surprise the dogs. The lamb's wool way an old dog's legs feel, her body failing her. The way the child sings a song she was taught about loneliness before being taught about loneliness. Throats, armpits, arches of feet, perfunctory head nods of strangers walking the opposite direction. Smoke pulled in soft through an open window along with the wind through wet hair. The twin images of neurons and cluster galaxies, the cold calm of a museum exhibit, maces and daggers backlit and serene. The way Bernini made marble supple, the way Caravaggio's brutal hands painted light. All the furious living, the turtle dragging herself algaed from the lake to the sand at the top of the playground to lay her eggs. All the furious dying, the unidentifiable viscera that the wasps are drinking from on the sidewalk, the way the wasps relish it. The heron lifting off, with a skyline behind her, berries crushed in mouths. The alabaster egg, the toy horse, the little brother at age 3 in his gray pajamas waving. The light and heat of the fairgrounds, the airy relief of the gondola in its primary colors, and the dank cool of the dark mill ride. The warm hand and the water lapping against the side of the boat, even the memory of them. The sulfur of a match struck, the dark it removes, and the way the dark comes back. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Gretchen. Wow. We've come to expect excellence from you, Gretchen, but you always surpass even those very high expectations. So thank you so much, and thank you for being a part of this program. I'm sure the mentees have been delighted to work with you. So thank you, and thank you for that reading. Before we move on to our last reader, I just want to remind everybody that in like a week, right, we're doing this all again with a couple of more mentees and 2 mentors, Janine Capo-Cruce and Junata Petrus. That's going to be great. That's going to be on Friday, June 5th. You'll be in this position, you'll see Marian Gomez, who's the terrific program manager of the Mentor Series. She's doing a ton of work right now behind the scenes, making sure all of the streaming stuff is happening. So we, of course, always want to thank Marian for all of her hard work, rallying all the mentors and mentees into this program, taking care of them, and organizing them. So thank you, Marian, and she'll be asking questions and doing introductions next week at that reading. So please feel free to come back and join us for that reading. It's going to be great. And again, as a reminder, buy Melissa and Gretchen's books from Milkweed, independent bookseller, partner of ours. Buy guilt-free. You're supporting a great local bookstore as well as these artists. And if you have questions for the end of the program's Q&A, you can either type it in that little box you see on your right side, or you can click on the Ask a Question tab on the left side, and we will funnel the questions to everyone. Okay? So, without further ado, our last reader tonight will be Melissa Febos. Melissa Febos is the author of the memoir Whip Smart and the essay collection Abandon Me, which was a Lambda Literary Award finalist, a Publishing Triangle Award finalist, an Indie Next Pick, and was widely named a Best Book of 2017. Her third book, Girlhood, an illustrated essay collection, is forthcoming on March 30th, 2021 from Bloomsbury. In 2018, Phoebus was the recipient of the Gian Cordova Nonfiction Award from the Lambda Literary and the Sarah Verdone Writing Award from the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. She has been awarded other prizes and fellowships from the McDowell Colony, Breadloaf Writers Conference, Virginia Center for Creative Arts, Vermont Steele Center, the Barbara Deming Memorial Foundation, the BAU Institute, Ragdale, Prairie Schooner, and others. Geez, whenever I read a bio like Melissa's, I'm always like, I feel like I should make myself look busy, like I'm doing something. Anyway, Her essays have recently appeared in Tin House, Granta, McSweeney's, The Believer, the Salwane Review, and the New York Times. What's that? Never heard of that. She is an associate professor at the University of Iowa, where she teaches in the nonfiction writing program. Please welcome Melissa Febos.
Thank you so much, Bao. And thank you all for your gorgeous readings. I am so impressed and so honored to be reading with you tonight. And I also want to thank everyone at Loft, especially Marian and Bao. As I said before we started, I've been so impressed with the quick and smooth transition to an online format. And I'm so glad that I was so looking forward to coming and doing this. I have an amazing time every time I come and do something at the Loft. And I was so sad and feared that it was going to be canceled. And I was so glad that it wasn't. And it was really a joy today to work with the fellows. It's a really, really strong, amazing group of writers. So it's been my honor. I was really struggling trying to think of like the right thing to read tonight, and nothing I've ever written is the right thing to read tonight. So I am going to read some of my own work, but I thought I might start with someone who could get to the heart of what feels right to me right now. And that's Audrey Lord, who's one of my favorite essayists and activists. I'm just going to read a few non-consecutive paragraphs from her essay, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action, which is out of this book, which if you don't have it, order it from Milkweed immediately. And yeah, so this is just, in solidarity with the protesters, especially where you are, but also here in Brooklyn and all over the United States. Also, there's been ice cream trucks and garbage trucks really loud outside. I live in a very busy street, so it might add a whimsical / horror movie vibe to whatever I'm reading. So a warning. This is Audrey Lord. I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood, that the speaking profits me beyond any other effect. My silences have not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I had ever made to speak those truths for which I am still seeking, I had made contact with other women while we examined the words to fit a world in which we all believed, bridging our differences. And it was the concern and caring of all those women which gave me strength and enabled me to scrutinize the essentials of my living. What other words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence? Perhaps for some of you here today, I am the face of one of your fears, because I am woman, because I am Black, because I am lesbian, because I am myself, a Black woman, warrior poet doing my work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours? I'll stop there, but there's just nothing she's ever written that doesn't give me chills and galvanize me. So it is her that I turn to on days like today. So now I'm going to follow that up really embarrassingly with some of my own writing. And I'm just going to read a few excerpts from my most recent book, Abandon Me. And I'm going to read a little bit from the title essay, which is really long. And it's about 140 pages, but it's broken up into 65 very short chapters. So I'm just going to read a few of those short chapters. And they were written so that they could hang together sort of in any order. So hopefully that holds. Okay, I'm not going to give any context. I'm just going to read a little bit. In the small Texas town, the trains ran all day. Each morning, we woke at dawn and sat in an orange chair by the window to watch the sunrise spill its mad colors across that enormous sky. Every sunrise was a carnival of color to the soundtrack of those trains. They barreled across the desert, and their rumble in my chest, the bleat of those whistles, reminded me of the foghorns on the Cape. Whistle is too weak a word. When a human makes such a sound, it expresses only a few things: terrible grief, earth-shattering climax, triumph, or pain. Not broken finger pain, but dying pain, childbirthing pain. That kind of sound is all body, all heart, out of mind. It's ironic that both train whistles and foghorns should evoke such animal feeling, as they both exist specifically for their listeners. Here I come, they say. Get off the tracks if you don't want my 200 tons of steel barreling into your chest. Steer your prow elsewhere if you don't want to wreck against my shore. Not a threat, but a warning. I can't stop myself, so it's up to you, stranger. One afternoon, from a nearby cafe table, a local told us a story about a train conductor who'd fallen in love and had his heart broken by a woman in town. Every time he passed through, he'd sound his train's whistle all the way, borrowing its wail for his own, so that the whole town could feel his busted heart hum in their chests, rattle their teeth, shake their skulls. And after that, every time a train passed and I heard that cry, I wondered if it was a warning or a wailing or a hallelujah. I thought of my own heart, how much I feared her breaking it. It would sound like that, I thought. It would be the only sound I ever heard again. It would be wrecking against the shore of one person for the rest of my life. I feared it so much that I broke my own heart every day that I loved her. I felt it when I watched her reading in the cafe, absent-mindedly scratching her head and twirling a pen with her long fingers. I felt it when we drove 30 miles to swim in a pool of water risen from deep underground, her skin warm and smooth as clay under my hands. On the way back, we stopped at the largest rattlesnake exhibit on the planet, where we paid $5 to two petrified men in a warehouse with a hand-painted sign steeped in the stench of snake shit, and stood in front of a rattler yellow as a fingernail and thicker than her leg leaned against me. And I whispered that I didn't have any underwear on because I had swam in them, and she laughed and told me a lady should always wear underpants to visit the largest rattlesnake exhibit on the planet. When I made love to her in that chair by the window, dawn glowing her body like a fruit split open to its wet center, I felt it, the way you feel a fall just looking over the edge of a roof. Will you love me forever? She asked me. Yes, I said. I couldn't know, though. When that whistle spills over the desert, you can only hear the call of your own heart. And when I looked at her, I wondered, are you my wrecking shore? Are you my third rail? Or are you my hallelujah? In his Confessions, St. Augustine asks God why tears are so sweet to the sorrowful. Euripides in the Trojan Women asks, how good are the tears, how sweet the dirges. I would rather sing dirges than eat or drink. I, too, have always had a taste for tears. I was a colicky baby and an emotional child. I cried for the fox and the hound, for baby birds in our backyard, for bullied classmates on the school bus, and most of all, I cried when the captain, my father, left. I watched him walk away again and again, and I sobbed, thinking, come back, come back. I hugged my crying mother, and I thought, I will do anything. I decided I needed to toughen up when I turned 8. On the bus on the way home from school, I imagined each of my family members dying. When tears rose in my eyes, I suppressed them. You can't cry, I told myself, or they really will die. Most importantly, I stopped crying when the captain left. I didn't have to try. I just stopped. In fact, I barely remember his departures after the age of 8. When my mother cried, I wrapped my arms around her, dry-eyed. After I stopped crying, I became clumsy. I tumbled downstairs and walked into walls. I tripped upstairs and burned my hands on the stove. I cut my fingers while chopping vegetables, and once I gave myself a paper cut on my eyeball. A therapist once told me that extreme clumsiness in children is a sign of depression. Severely depressed people do not that often cry, nor do severely neglected babies. Tears are an essentially hopeful act. Inherent to them is the body's belief that someone is watching. When the psyche gives up hope that those cries will be answered, the tears stop. I was not severely neglected nor severely depressed, but I did stop hoping for rescue. My mother begged the captain to stop leaving. I woke from dreams calling his name, but when he was gone, he was gone. No amount of crying could summon him. And this is the last little chapter I'll read. 4 months into loving her, I cried. Once I started, I couldn't stop. It was not voluptuous, it was not ecstatic, it was not sweet, except in the way that a sweet thing is a siren, its call impossible to ignore. Except in the way that a sweet thing, a thing you cannot ignore, can ravage. If sweet means irresistible, then my tears were sweet, but they were not pretty and they did not taste good. In the past, I never cried over lovers. I never fought with lovers. I never waited for lovers, and I never lost control. My worst fear was to be needy. When I thought about neediness, I felt like there were snakes on me. When I thought about asking for something that someone couldn't or wouldn't give me, I felt like I had stepped in shit. Women who obsessed over men who did not give them what they needed repelled me, as if need were a contagious disease. I looked at the brokenhearted, at the needy, at the unrequited, at women who waited like my mother had waited, and I thought, never. In Aesop's fable of the fox and the grapes, the fox desires the grapes. The grapes, however, are out of his reach. So the fox tells himself he doesn't want the grapes. The grapes make him sick. He convinces himself. When I was still a child, I had decided that grapes weren't so sweet after all. I would rather have lived in a world without the sweetness of grapes than in this world where grapes were often out of reach and did not lower themselves no matter how hard I cried. At 32, I bit her lip. That sweet flooded my mouth, and I remembered. I often kidded about the voracious need that must be hiding deep inside me. I sat for hours in therapy sessions searching for my feelings. I wanted to get in touch with them. I thought that when I finally found them, it would be like a reunion with a childhood friend. Emotional, surely, but also sweet, a reward for all my hard work in therapy. I did not think that I was leaving messages for a serial killer. I did not think that my feelings receiving my invitation would arrive on my doorstep like a cabal of mad women and refuse to leave. I thought that the host of the party decided when it ended and her guests went home. But feelings have terrible manners. They are like children or drunks. They are mad. They gorge as the starved will gorge until they are sick, until their stomachs split, as you or I would if we were exiled for 30 years. They do not leave when you want them to. They leave when they are finished. Thanks. Sorry if that's bad news for anybody.
Wow, thank you so much for your words, Melissa, and of course, the great Audrey Lord, who you opened with. Thank you so much for that. What a way to end the reading portion of tonight. Again, thank you for being a part of the program. I very quickly want to thank, again, you all for reading tonight. That's, again, Claudette, Patti, Michael, Gretchen, Melissa, you all were fantastic. These are difficult times, and you have to do this online. Thank you so much for doing it, and congratulations on being part of this wonderful storied program. So next up, as I understand it, we're going to have the mentors, Gretchen and Melissa, ask a couple of questions of the mentees, correct? And I'm not going to intervene. I'm just going to literally shut up by clicking this button, and I'm going to let Gretchen and Melissa take it from here for the time being, and I'll be back with questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Bao. Thanks again, everybody. Gretchen, do you have any burning questions that you want to start with, or should I start?
I suppose I just am always curious. You all obviously have like a deep home in language, and I'm always just really curious either kind of how you first sort of discovered that, which is, I think, a different question than like, why did you start writing or something? I hope it's a different question than that. How did you sort of first discover you had that deep home in language? Or if you don't really know the answer to that, sort of like, what does it mean to you as you go about your daily lives, maybe especially in times like this? I'll mute myself now, just in case. My dog is being a little rambunctious, so. Don't be shy.
So I'm happy to give this one a go. I have a very clear memory of when this happened, and it was something that brought up the competitive streak in me in the second grade. And my competition was my teacher at the time. And the reason this happened was because I was a rather, let's say, social child, rather rambunctious. I spoke a lot, and the classroom punishment for speaking too much was that you had to write down your name. And if you wrote down your name 3 times, that meant over recess you had to transcribe dictionary definitions for recess, and you were not able to go to recess until you had gotten to the end of that sheet of paper. By the end of that year, or at some point in that year, I was able to get through those lists. I knew the dictionary, I just knew mentally where words were going to be, and I could finish that and still get out to recess with my friends. And so I marked that as the time when I truly fell in love with language.
That's an amazing story. Yeah.
I will say that for me, it started, I was a shy person. And when I first arrived in the United States, just trying to adjust to this space was difficult. And I found a home in just writing and journaling for myself. And so that is what has helped me to create a home in writing.
I think this is definitely not it. This is the only thing that's coming to my mind is that. So I came to the U.S. for college, and then I would in college I would go home during winter break, and I guess I've been always been really good at getting jet lag. I would have really bad jet lag, and the thing that I would do at night when there's nothing to do and I can't go to sleep was just write terrible stories. I mean, at the time they were terrible stories, but that was the magical thing that happened was that once a year I would just have these stories would emerge. And so I think that's how it started, that stuck in the middle of the night with nothing else to do, I was putting words on the page.
And then you figured out how to do that whenever you wanted.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. I kind of started the same way when I was a little kid. I would tell myself stories, and I shared a room with my little sister, and she told my parents that I talked to myself at night. And so they sat me down to see, are you sure you're okay? And is there anything you need to tell us? And no, I didn't want them to know I was telling myself stories because it was a secret. So anyway, I'm gonna meet myself again.
So when I was a little kid, I was surrounded by multiple languages, not because we were a multilingual family, but because we had Spanish language TV shows, and I didn't really understand what was happening, but I somehow got the idea that you can tell a story and convey emotion through language, even if you can't necessarily understand the words. And I was always kind of fascinated by that. I did have Japanese language kids songs on records. I didn't understand those either, but those two also were a lot of fun to listen to. So yeah, for me, it was kind of like a game to switch between different ways of telling a story.
I really miss you guys. Hearing you talk about your stories and stuff. I miss meeting in person. So I can't wait till we can do that again someday. So yeah, that was my major question I wanted to ask. So
yeah, that was a great question, and I also loved hearing all those answers. I was wondering, after hearing everything that you read, it sounds like everybody's sort of working on a longer project, and most of your projects incorporate some kind of research. And it's my practice is one of writing sort of autobiographically driven work, but I like to bring in lots of other sources and use historical context. And I've been a detective of my own family history, and it sounds like all of you are sort of digging back into things, and I guess I'm interested in what that process has been like for you and how important that is to your current projects.
I'll go. I think the research for me has been kind of a way less of finding out new things and more about finding out that the things that I know are real and not made up. I think that like one thing that happened this year was that I discovered that there are half Japanese people on Twitter, and I have like followed a bunch of them, and it's just been like, I guess it's hard to write about something when you don't know, when you're only relying on your own perspective, when you're having to trust your own judgment about whether something really happened and whether it was important or not. And so like just recognizing some of those things in other people's, just knowing that, you're not crazy, like other people are noticing these things too, is I think kind of how it's been most helpful for me being able to write about it.
Yeah, I relate to that a lot.
So I'm approaching creative writing from academic history, so my background's a bit different. But what I'm trying to do, it's actually a fun exercise for me to start with a topic. So I found some materials in an archive. It's a bunch of diaries. So I'm trying to think about how to turn those diaries into an interesting story. And it's a lot of fun. You find a clue in a diary, like, okay, we got a violet ray lamp. What is the violet ray lamp? And, you just dump down this rabbit hole and find out all kinds of other things about consumer culture. So, it's a kind of loose process, but it's a lot of fun to combine that in the storytelling exercises.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Go for it, Claudette. We're both being super polite right now.
Well, I will say that I've just become very interested in the migration of people, island peoples like myself, come into a place like New York, and remembering how that transition was for me, and learning about other people who have made this transition, and also really interested in my mother's history of what brought her here, and just trying to get more understanding of that background and match it up with, maybe not match it up, and just look at the legacies of the stories that we bring and what comes forth being in a new place, and whether you're welcome or not, what unfolds as a result. So I'm just trying to get a deeper understanding of that and seeing where the stories are.
And I will, I'll take my answer in a slightly different direction, because I'm, especially in the piece that I write, for instance, not necessarily going back and looking at, I'm not doing a whole lot of research in the sense of looking for source material to then bring into my story. But given that this is, a fellowship and a program for emerging writers, I do truly feel that I am the definition of emerging right now. And so this process has been a sense of finding those sources that feel like they give me license to write by whatever means necessary. I'm just starting to get that story out. And so part of that has been hearing first, Salman Rushdie in an interview with Deborah Treisman in the New Yorker podcast, saying that when he was writing his recent novel Keyshot, he would constantly go and look at people who have solved time traveling mechanisms in their writing, for instance, and just reread those to freshen up, and then go give it his own shot. And then Lydia Davis in her essay collection did the same thing, talking about kind of apprentice style writing, where she would just go back and look at masters and how they've done things. Marcel Proust, I think, is one that she mentions a lot, and then just do that. And to hear them or read them and see that that is part of their process, it allowed me to no longer feel that shame of the emerging writer of, oh my goodness, this is what I'm doing too, but should I be doing it? How will I ever come up with an original voice, an original angle for my own story if this is what I'm doing? I no longer have that kind of anxiety of influence after hearing from Salman Rushdie and Lydia Davis that is also part of their process.
Okay.
Thank you all so much. Sorry, Bill.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. You all answered, right? You both asked questions. You all answered. Great. I'm still totally checking out your cat. I'm always secretly looking for cats on all the Zoom stuff. So I'm super glad you're providing that. We have one question from the audience so far. Those of you who have not yet asked a question, feel free to do so. Again, you can type it right there in the message section, or you can click over to questions and answers and ask it there. So the question we have for all of you is, how has the pandemic affected your writing? There's so much going on. Oh yeah, there's also a pandemic right now. So any of you who want to answer that, feel free. And then when there's a significant lull, if none of you want to answer it, I'll move on to the next question.
All right, I'll take it. Well, it's been hard. It was really hard in the beginning. Although I had sort of the small mercy of book edits that I had just gotten back from my editor on this book I have coming out next year. And that was sort of the perfect thing to be able to work on, because I just had a to-do list that somebody else gave me, and I was sort of scrolling through and fixing things. And I just didn't really have to be in my own self that much to do it. But when that was done, I was completely overtaken by this sense of creative despair and nihilism and unable to work on anything. And sort of all of the, I never run out of things to write about. I feel like I have too many things I want to write about usually. But when I looked at all my lists of things that I wanted to write about, I just felt like, who cares? And kind of as an earnest question, like, who cares? I couldn't, it was just, I was having a failure of imagination to envision what an audience would be for anything that wasn't about how to survive right now. And so I didn't really do anything for a while. And then, I acclimated, as we do, and I sort of picked the thing that I still got a little fired up about, and I started writing a new essay, and it was really painful at first. And then this is the thing that writing has always been for me too. And I'm really grateful for it right now, that my relationship to my work is one of sort of rescue. It's a place where I can sort of get away to also find how I'm actually feeling. And so it's been kind of perfect. It's perfect for hard times if I can just sort of get into it, which I finally have a few weeks in. So that's how it's been for me.
Any other takers?
I'm a journaler, so I journal. I've been journaling my way through this whole thing.
I have a kind of a similar thing too, that it's hard to focus on something that's not immediate. But I think that the thing that's worked for me is if I'm reading something, I find I'm always writing something. And so with the pandemic, I've been doing like book exchanges, which means I both have a pile of books and I have to like read them before it's too long because I can't like borrow books forever from my friends. And so that's kind of how I got back on track.
If any of you have like a super burning desire to answer the question, raise your hand. Otherwise, we do have a couple other questions. Anyone? No? Okay. Let's see here. Click, click, click. Haley Kirkwood asks, what other forms of art and media other than literature inspire your writing? Any takers?
Yes, I'll take that. I have found that, like most people, I've also been kind of struggling to try to write anything during the pandemic. And I was teaching some undergraduates an intro to poetry class, and somehow they turned work in every week for me. And a lot of it was about the pandemic itself, but I was like so impressed that they could get work done. So I have to give them a shout out first and foremost. But anyway, what I've been doing when I can't write is I like to collage, which some of you already know because we had like a collage party, the fellows and I, and I've been doing that, and that feels really akin to poetry in a lot of ways, bringing a bunch of different disparate images together. But I also am a fiction writer, a secret fiction writer, and there's just so much good television. And being stuck at home, I've been watching it, and it just lights a fire inside of me. The writing it makes me want to tell my own stories. So my answer is and really good TV.
Other takers for this question?
So I'll go ahead. The other medium for sure would be film. Over the last month, some friends and I have just over text, shared. I think there's the same one with music, but there's one for movies as well, which is like the 30-day film challenge where there's a specific theme and then everybody replies with kind of a movie that stuck out to them. So we did that, and it was a good opportunity to just kind of remind myself of all the forms of film expression that you might not expect a story to be told that way. So many genres and films all over the world. So I definitely find cinema to be the other medium that I turn to the most to find inspiration in storytelling.
I find art a really helpful way to learn about the past. So thinking about, what kinds of pictures people were creating after World War I, for example, can help me really enter that world, and it helps me write about it.
Does anybody else have a burning desire to answer this question, or should we move on to our very last one? Sorry, the very last question for this evening is from Allison Griffith. She asks, I'm sure you're all constantly having millions of ideas for stories in your heads. Which ideas become stories, and how does that process of pinning a story down in writing happen for you?
I'll answer this one. And maybe I get the feeling that she's thinking fiction, but I'm going to answer for nonfiction because that's what I do. And it's pretty simple for me. It's like, this hasn't always been the case, but my own experience of myself has taught me that basically whenever I have the thought that I'm afraid to write about something, or I could never say that, that's usually something I'm going to write about. As soon as I have the thought, I could never write about that, either because I feel not equipped, or I couldn't possibly, it's unspeakable, or it's too vulnerable. Like that's usually where I go. That's where my best stuff comes from. And then in terms of pinning it down, I'm a very visual learner and thinker. And so I have like sometimes pretty elaborate, sometimes very circumscribed processes of like notes and timelines and index cards. And I have to sort of externalize my process and my plan. So I do a lot of sort of lists and note taking and map drawing, so that when I sit down to write, I usually know what my points sort of A, B, and C are, even if I digress from that plan.
For me, it's that I will. So I keep a notebook or just a document of usually just images of oftentimes of two characters coming together, and it's the ones that I, without doing any effort, keep thinking about, and they never go away without my having done any writing whatsoever. That I know that's the kind of character dynamic and situation that I need to keep pursuing in writing. And then for as far as pinning it down, it's just a matter of once those fingers start typing on that keyboard, if it keeps going, then I keep going too.
Mine is actually pretty straightforward. I work on a story idea if it comes with a first line. Usually I start from the first sentence. If an idea doesn't come with a first sentence, I don't start with it. It doesn't usually end up being the first sentence of the story. Like a lot of the times it drops out of the story or something happens beforehand. But that's how I write sentence by sentence. Like I don't outline or plan. And so that's just how it goes. Like when I run out of sentences, and if the story is not finished, it won't get finished.
Well, Claudette, I think you have to. Oh, okay. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, similar to, it's a thing that keeps staying in my head that I need to put on the paper. So that's, and then I start playing with it, and I play with it, and I play with it. Just keep, I guess, trying to pull it out of me as much as possible, and until it feels like it's forming and forming and forming and forming. So the thing that stays with me, that just feels like it's time for you to talk about this or to write about this or whatever, and then see what comes. And also just sharing it with people just to kind of get a sense of where I'm going or I'm not going, what I need to see more.
All right. Well, I think that's what we have, all the time we have for tonight. So again, Claudette, Patti, Michael, Gretchen, Melissa, y'all are champs. You did this. It was a wonderful reading. Thank you for spending time. Thank you for being part of this wonderful program. We wish you all the best. And we want to thank Marian Gomez, of course, who's been working behind the scenes on both this program and almost all of the Mentor series, managing this program. We want to send eternal thanks to Marian and everyone at the Loft Literary Center. Everything that we do is a team program. Every program we do is a team effort. Everything from teaching non-tech people like me how to run these programs, to raising money, to organizing classes, and all of this all requires a team of people who work behind the scenes, often thanklessly. All that labor, thank you, Loft. Thanks also to our partners at Milkweed. You can buy books. Again, please do buy books. We want to also thank the Jerome Foundation, again, who has supported this program for over 40 years. We also want to thank the generosity of Loft members. As a reminder, everyone, come back June 5th, which is in exactly 1 week, for another Mentor Series reading. It's actually the last one for this year, featuring Janine Capo-Cuset and Junata Petrus. Last but not least, thank you so much, audience members, for spending time with us tonight on a Friday night in a heavy, heavy world at this point in time. We thank you so much. Art and artists need you, and thank you for showing up for them. With that, again, everyone, have a good night and be well. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.